Alright, this is video 2 about civil rights, and sorry I said there would be new stuff here, but I think this is a review as well. This is now 1938, 1930 to 1948. If you notice, that last one had a ton of years. This one's about 18 years, and really kind of the bulk when the 3, 4, 5, and 6 videos are real close together because a lot of stuff is happening. This is now going to be considered the modern movement, okay? That whole first video we talked about, we call that the early movement. However, this is now moving into the modern movement with the idea of nonviolent protest and civil disobedience and marches and all that things. Whereas the early movement is just kind of trying to address the issues, establishment of NAACP, a lynching law, etc. All right, here we go. First thing we have here, in the 1930s, all the way to 1970, there is a second Great Migration. Again, African Americans are going to leave the South in large numbers and move up north. Now, beginning in 1950, some of them started to come back down to the Sun Belt, and definitely today. And so a lot of these cities that are there in red are going to become kind of ghost towns and centers of poverty and other things, which is very chaotic, but that's how it works. Now, also in 1930, a man named Mahatma, or Mohandas Gandhi, is going to lead the Great Salt March. Now, this is important because Gandhi is not a Christian. However, he said he's going to introduce us to a couple of ideas that are going to really push the civil rights into this modern movement. Number one, it's called direct confrontational methods. You might know someone who runs away from confrontation because they don't like it. Gandhi said we've got to meet it. We've got to meet it head on. That doesn't mean we have to be aggressive. Thing number two, nonviolent protest. So I'm going to address you directly and tell you I don't like what you're doing. However, I'm not going to be militant or violent or aggressive. However, I am going to get my point across to you. And lastly, it's called civil disobedience. And so with these three things there, and civil disobedience is obeying laws that are unjust. With these three things now in place, Gandhi sets out to achieve what he wants, and that is independence. He lived in India. India was controlled by the British, and much like the British had done with the United States and the Boston Tea and some kind of intolerable acts and taxing things, they're doing it to the Indians. Mainly it was salt. So Gandhi leads this great salt march down to the ocean, and all the people in the march pick up a single grain of sand. Well, they march back to the tax collector, and they one by one put their grains of sand down, and he goes, "We could do this all day. You're not going to get any more money out of us." So he's really going to establish the line. Dr. King bases all of, you don't want to say all of it because a lot of it does have Christian overtone, but he's going to use those three aspects I mentioned of direct confrontation, nonviolent protest, and civil disobedience. Okay? Now, also in 1939, and I talked about this was a very interesting story, right? Marian Anderson, great opera singer, she's denied the right to sing at Constitution Hall because she is African American, and due to separate but equal laws, she can't sing there. So she is given the opportunity to sing in the kind of front space, if you will, of the Lincoln Memorial. Kind of a nod to Lincoln. She sings "My Country 'Tis of Thee," and this is for kind of the first time we see a person, or a highly important person, Eleanor Roosevelt, quit an administration, or quit an organization rather she was in, because of civil rights. Now also, 1939 we have the beginning of World War II. And so from 1941, when we are involved in World War II, until 45 when we are out, African Americans are going to participate in the Double V campaign, which was victory over fascism and victory over racism, or at home and abroad. They felt that if they went and proved themselves in war, when they returned, people would kind of drop the Jim Crow and the separate but equal, and it didn't work like that. During World War II as well, we hear the exploits of the Red Tails, aka the Tuskegee Airmen, and the fact that they never left a man behind, and all these great stories are going to prompt people to act in the late 40s and early 50s. And to go, we can't leave a man behind. We can't leave anybody. So if there's any type of injustice, we've got to band together and we've got to work to a solution. Now, 1941 here domestically, I brought this up about a Philip Randolph. He's in charge of a union called the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters. Remember, a porter was an attendant, and so they were essentially not given opportunities for better jobs. They weren't trained conductors or anything like that. They were simply an attendant. And so he bands his people together, and he decides this discrimination in job hiring has got to stop. So he's going to announce that he's going to march on Washington. His proposed thing was he's going to, get thousands, maybe even a million, to march on Washington and to show FDR that they're not going to take it. Now, FDR, fearing that this could look bad, we're getting close to war at this point, will issue Executive Order 8802, which called for an immediate halt to the discrimination in job hiring practices, and it also established what is called the Fair Employment Practices Commission, making sure that everyone is treated fairly, and so that the jobs are doled out in a productive way. So Randolph calls off his march, but Dr. King is really going to study that and use it as a kind of a learning tool in the 60s. Now, also 1942, still during World War II here, James Farmer is going to establish the CORE, or Congress of Racial Equality. Again, interracial group, much like NAACP. But whereas NAACP is going to use the courts and the law systems, CORE is going to use big nonviolent protests and march and things like that. This is the second of what we call the Big Six. We also had the National Urban League, which I don't bring up much. I did earlier. Now, in 1946, President Truman is going to establish the Presidential Commission on Civil Rights. The whole goal, are civil rights being met? It comes back with the big duh moment. They're not. So how does he respond to this? He's going to, as he's running for re-election, have to deal with the split. His party, the Democratic Party, will split. The Southern Democrats become known as Dixiecrats. Their leader was Strom Thurmond. He ran for president in 1948. And ultimately, it's about states' rights. Now, I said I would bring this up here, so this is kind of cool. There is a book written called Dear Senator, and this is a memoir of the daughter of Strom Thurmond. Now, what makes Essie Mae Washington Thurmond, or Williams rather, so interesting is she happens to be African American. So she is the illegitimate daughter of this guy whose constituents or people put him in office is all about states' rights. And it kind of goes to show you, and a lot of people have wondered for years, well, why didn't you come out and say your dad was full of crap? But he took care of her. What happened is, when in college, he had an affair with a black maid in his household, and he made a deal to take care of his daughter, and he did. However, he's kind of two-faced, if you will, because he's still talking about and preaching this doctrine of hate. And how does that happen? But it happens a ton in this country. You want to appeal to people to stay in power. Now, in 1947, the United States comes really, really interestingly enough with the occurrences of Jackie Robinson and what he was doing and what had been going on. Remember, he was the first African American in the Professional Baseball League, the Major Baseball League, MLB. And if you've ever seen the movie 42, you know what I'm talking about. If you haven't, that is a good one to go and rent and to see what he went through and how, yes, I want to hit him, yes, I want to fight back, but I can't because that's counterproductive. Violence will not solve anything. Now, 1948, as Truman is getting close to be reelected here, he will issue Executive Order 9981, which ended segregation in the armed forces. So now, because of the exploits of the Tuskegee Airmen, which we've talked about, these African Americans and whites and all these other races are able to fight in the same units. And so that's a major thing. Now, I know I said before, but I'll say it here. The next video definitely has some new stuff, guys. So don't just kind of shut down here, but hopefully we can see that, right? Video 1 was the early movements, kind of addressing the issues, and we can definitely start seeing how things work here. You threaten to march, you get executive orders. Presidents are starting to study stuff out. We have another organization. Then in the 1950s and really the 1960s, things get crazy, right? And so the next video is going to go from like 1949 until about 1963 with the death of Kennedy. All right, so we're going to look at that one next.